Bumpy Johnson returns home from Alcatraz to be with his family at the beginning of the season. Everything is overwhelming him. Margaret, his daughter, consoles him. Later on, Bumpy finds out that Vincent Giganti, aka Chin, the head of one of the Italian mob families, has taken over Harlem. He approaches him and informs him that Bumpy owns Harlem and that he must go. Chin says no and wants to get rid of Bumpy. However, another Italian mob boss, Frank Costello, who acts as a mediator between different Italian crime families, informs Chin that the other families oppose his pursuit of Bumpy. Even though it was their men's responsibility, Bumpy was imprisoned for not informing on the families. Bumpy finds out that Malcolm became a Muslim and is currently serving as a pastor in the Nation of Islam. By assisting others in overcoming addiction, Malcolm hopes to benefit the community. He requests Bumpy's men selling drugs. Since they were closing his corner, Chin arrives with his troops. However, Bumpy arrives to stand by Malcolm. Chin and his soldiers are surrounded by Bumpy. Bumpy informs Chin that everything in Harlem must be approved by him and that Harlem is his. Chin chooses to go back, since she knows Bumpy is surrounded by other families who are watching out for him. However, Bumpy is threatened by Chin's man, Zambrino. So Bumpy's families will pursue him and his family if Bumpy kills him. Although Malcolm was successful in closing the corner, he felt that Bumpy had taken advantage of him. Feeling embarrassed, Zambrino pays to have Bumpy killed. However, the guy he sends is unsuccessful and is apprehended by Bumpy's men. After torturing him for some time, he informs Bumpy that he got recruited by Zambrino, Mamie, Bumpy's son, to change his ways because he is seeing a white woman. When Bumpy finds Teddy, he discovers that Teddy is seeing Stella Giganti, who is Chin Giganti's daughter. She also took a pack of drugs from her. Chin ever finds him. While using Stella as leverage, he forces Teddy to leave town. Bumpy murders Zambrino for trying to kill him. Bumpy, used Stella as leverage, causes Chin to accept responsibility for Zambrino since Zambrino had stolen from him. And he also made Chin relinquish Harlem. Additionally, Bumpy assists Malcolm by enabling him to communicate with Congressman Adam Clayton's supporters, since he allowed Powell to appear on the ballot. Using her husband's connections, Mamie also persuades the congressman to assist her in raising money for her fundraiser for youth outreach. Elise, Bumpy's addicted daughter, is also shown to us. To assist her in getting clean, Bumpy brings her to Malcolm. It is at this point that we discover Margaret is actually Bumpy's grandchild, and although she is unaware of it, Elise is her biological mother. She was brought up as Bumpy and Mamie's own daughter. After getting clean, Elise visits Bumpy's home to spend time with her daughter. However, Mamie threatens Elise and gives her money to go since she doesn't want her in her life. Elise consequently goes and gets high once more. Meanwhile, we see one of Chin's men, Ernie, being caught by the cops for having drugs. It is when two detectives take him in, but in reality, they were on the payroll of Chin. They let Ernie go and give Chin his pills back for a price. Chin, knowing he cannot go after Bumpy, asks the detectives to take care of him and gives them 50 grand. Meanwhile, with Chin backing off Harlem, Bumpy requires stable and good quality of product to continue running Harlem. But as of yet, he has no vendors. His friend Alejandro gets for him the details for a source. As Bumpy goes for the buy, he finds it was a setup by the cops that the investigators were waiting for him. The detectives frame him for a murder. At the police station, Bumpy was able to figure out that the detectives are working for Chin. He lets their captain know the same. It is then we learn that their captain was an old buddy of Bumpy. While the captain interrogates the detectives, Bumpy posts bail. The detectives threaten the captain, saying that they will take him down with them if they fail. To solve all of his problem, Bumpy devises a strategy. Together with the captain, Bumpy retrieves all of the drugs from the police cell. Bumpy assisted the captain in making the detectives appear guilty of stealing the drugs, thus giving him an excuse to kill them. Bumpy reimburses the captain for his assistance. However, Stella has been working toward Teddy's music in an attempt to give it a chance. Also, Stella consents to go out with Ernie in an effort to patch things up with her father. She later goes on another date with one of Teddy's pals, and Ernie kills Stella's date because he believes the guy she met is her boyfriend Teddy. Chin is informed by Ernie that he has killed Stella's love ends meet. However, she is apprehended during one such effort. Unaware of her identity, one of the black police officers who apprehended her sexually abused her. Bumpy and his friend Malcolm arrive at the store to learn more about her daughter. Elise tells him that she was abused. However, Elise calls out the white police officer for abusing her. He becomes quite angry. Additionally, he publicly accepts Elise as his daughter for the first time. Malcolm reassures him that their voices will be heard and helps him to relax. Reverend Powell, who is advocating for a civil rights bill for black people, also visits the business to express his support as word of the incident spreads. Reverend Powell and Malcolm X both attempt to take advantage of the circumstance. Bumpy discourses with her daughter Elise and discovers that she holds him responsible for her predicament. As they conversed, Bumpy was able to determine that the black police officer was, in fact, the one who had abused her. With Frank serving as the mediator, Chin requests a meeting with Bumpy after learning about the problem and realizing that Malcolm's crew are encircling the store. Since the store is under his protection, Chin wants Bumpy to defuse the conflict so that it doesn't get destroyed. Chin wants things to remain hidden in the store, Bumpy deduces. However, he consents to the same thing as long as the Italians agree to give him their dope. With a new perspective, Chin concurs with this. Reaching back, Bumpy informed the officers that the white cop could only be arrested and then released as a means of defusing the situation. With no other option, police officers choose to follow suit. The crowd eventually thins down when Bumpy and Elise make a plea. After going through the tragedy, Elise resolves to get her when he confronts the police officer who abused her. We also learn that Chin had a body buried in the store's basement, indicating that he didn't want the establishment to sustain any damage because of the body. Chin moves the body, aware that the area is compromised. Later, he told his priestly brother about it, that he was unhappy to see the boy having an affair with her daughter and had paid to have him killed years ago. We find out that the youngster that Chin killed was the son of Joe Bonanno, a powerful boss in the crime family. Later on, Bumpy is seen chatting with Amy Vanderbilt, a wealthy white woman. Prior to his incarceration, Bumpy had an intimate relationship with her. Bumpy wishes to remain faithful to Mamie for the time being, though. Additionally, her organization is supporting Cassius Clay, a budding boxer who will compete against Doug Jones, a local boxing icon. When Cassius Clay meets Malcolm, it becomes that he keep his beliefs to himself before to the game. His career will finish before it starts because many people would quit supporting him because he is black and follows Islam. Since the FBI had bugged Malcolm's mosque, Ernie was able to, threatening to disclose the recording unless he takes a fall. When Malcolm learns of this, he begs Bumpy for assistance. Bumpy shares it with Amy and her friends, who are rooting for Clay. However, they were previously aware of Clay's Islamic leanings and are unwilling to become more involved. Additionally, Clay emotionally appeals to Bumpy to assist him. Bumpy assures him that he will take care of the tape, so he should fight without worrying about it. In the meantime, we witness Chin and Bonanno engaging in a turf war. They come to an agreement after Frank persuades them that Bonanno can utilize Chin's turf for business purposes as long as he pays him taxes. Despite his disapproval of the stipulations, Bonanno accepts them since he has no other choice. Chin tips Bonanno after feeling denigrated by him, saying that he has arranged the boxing bout and that he should wager on Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay puts up a fierce fight and prevails as the boxing match begins. The video, however, can be obtained from Chin's office by Bumpy's men. Knowing Bumpy is accountable, Chin avenges him by eliminating his soldiers. In addition, he also fixes the lottery, consequently causing Bumpy to suffer large losses. In order to keep his reputation intact, Bumpy needs a lot of money to reimburse all of the winners. Knowing that Bonanno would not be pleased with Chin's arrangement, and in goods in exchange for his paying more for the latter. Bonanno is pleased to do this since it will increase his profits and spare him from having to pay Chin taxes. Bumpy pays all the winners after receiving the money. Nevertheless, Chin's men arrive at the exchange before him, stealing the goods and murdering Bonanno's men in the process. Chin tells Bumpy to know his place by rubbing the same thing in his face. Knowing that he cannot go after Chin directly because the families are protecting him makes Bumpy angry. However, in order to garner more support for himself and to fight for the rights of black people in Congress, Reverend Powell informs his congregation that the police are focusing more on. He pledges to identify white number runners each week until they are dealt with. He is now forced to give up his name because his sermon touched a nerve with the populace. Powell, however, asks Bumpy for names because he did not know any Italian involvement. Bumpy informs him that he is not a rat by refusing to give him a name. If he doesn't give him an Italian name, Congressman Powell threatens to give him the name of a black woman, Esther James, who he put in his suggestion box as one of the white people's money runners. He is advised not to do so by Bumpy. However, when forced to do so during an interview, he ultimately names Esther James as the white's bag lady. However, that proves to be untrue. Powell is confronted by Esther, who slaps him before suing him. Unable to give a credible white name, Congressman Powell forces an Italian informant to reveal the Italian mafia families during a congressional session. Mr. Villici consents, and he identifies Chini Gani as a mob boss. He pretends to be mentally unstable when the feds visit him to avoid being questioned. To resolve the conflict, Frank forces Bumpy, Chin, and Bonanno to sit down together. Chin informs Frank that he was correct to take the merchandise because Bonanno went back on his promise and refused to return them. Although Bonanno acknowledges the loss, he nevertheless demands that Bumpy reimburse him for the money he gave him. He is informed, even though he hoped to get paid back from the earnings, Frank devises a solution, telling Bumpy that if he kills Villachi, who has consented to tell on them, his debt would be forgiven. With no other option, Bumpy pursues Villachi. However, they fail when his companion Alejandro confuses the room numbers. Furthermore, they can no longer reach Villachi. Villachi is pushed for further names by Congressman Powell. Fearing for his life, Villachi consents to provide one more name, that of someone who has worked with all the families and is able to provide a great deal more information, rather than that of an AMOB manager. With the help of his sources, Chin discovered that Villachi will be naming Alejandro. Since Bumpy was unable to remove Villachi, he now has a duty to kill his friend Alejandro before he is recorded. Alejandro gets visited by Bumpy. He tells him that a contract has been offered to him. Bumpy is informed by Alejandro that he will be into witness protection. He promises Bumpy that he would always be there for him. However, Bumpy shoots and murders Alejandro because he knows he will speak and because he owes money. After paying off his debt, Bumpy returns to Banano and requests that he give him additional merchandise. However, Banano informs him that he wants to provide him the items because he believes a black guy killed his kid and wants to supply drugs to Harlem. But he can't go against Chin again for the time being. We witness Elise sobering up and joining Malcolm's mosque to find meaning. Elise becomes an Islamic convert and begins assisting others in overcoming addiction at the mosque. She also makes amends with Mamie throughout her recuperation and consents to be a part of Margaret's life as her older sister. The Nation of Islam's founder, Elijah Muhammad, is impressed by Elise when he visits Harlem. He begs her to spy on Malcolm for him because he is becoming more and more popular for his violent views. Although they do it in different ways, Malcolm and Adam Powell are both fighting for the rights of black people. They decide to gather and march on Washington together in spite of their divergent views. Teddy, meanwhile, returns to Harlem after being unable to avoid Stella. Stella manages to get him an audition and, subsequently, a recording contract. When Teddy and Stella are discovered kissing, they are taken into her. Ernie decides to bail out Stella. As Ernie comes to the realization that he killed the wrong man, Stella warns him that he would be the first to be killed if he tells her father about Teddy. However, it turns out that Chin has already learned about it. He gives Ernie another chance to make amends. Ernie doesn't want to, because he has feelings for Stella and is aware of how much she loves Teddy. Rather, he attempts to intimidate Teddy and demands that he leave the city. Teddy informs him, however, that he will not be departing. Stella seeks assistance from Bumpy after realizing the danger to Teddy. Bumpy devises a scheme to transfer Teddy's music contract to Banano's business because he wants the Italians to quarrel with one another. Upon more investigation, he was able to determine that Chin was, in fact, the one who gave the order to kill Banano's son. He goes to tell Banano the same thing. Stella supports him as well, telling him that she thinks her father killed his kid after seeing him and her together. Aware of this, Banano fights Chin, murdering his soldiers while providing Bumpy with goods. Chin pursues Bumpy after learning that he was the one who had Teddy's contract changed to Banano's. Despite being shot, Bumpy lives. He is informed by Frank that he cannot pursue Chin. Bumpy is upset about it since, despite the family's protection, they are unwilling to help him. However, Mamie begs Bumpy to make his will following his life-threatening incident. They discover that they have never formally adopted Margaret at that point. Elise declines Bumpy's request to relinquish her parental rights for the time being. However, Bumpy and she are able to forgive one another for the past and become closer as a result. In the meantime, a protest is growing in Harlem due to poor living conditions and consequent non-payment of rent by renters. Reverend Powell defends the tenants' rights. Elijah Muhammad wants the Islamic country to remain a religious community and not get engaged in politics, but Malcolm also assists in protecting the tenants. So he asks Malcolm to get up. Malcolm, however, is not content with this since he is aware that he cannot stand his people. Alongside Reverend Powell, they are attempting to identify the individuals responsible for the building's shell corporations. Powell refuses to comply with Bumpy's offer to pay for the tenants' repairs if he stops looking, which would put an end to the protests. Bumpy tells Banano about Powell's probe when they meet, telling him that every mob family owns a stake in the shell corporations Powell is looking into and that they will all face consequences if their identities are revealed. Bumpy requests that he remove Chin from office in return for Reverend Powell resigning. Bumpy is unable to give up, even after using the Esther James case as leverage on Powell, and despite his best attempts, Powell discovered that the shell corporations are owned by Bumpy Johnson and Italian mob families. Mamie begs Powell not to provide the police with Bumpy's identity. Powell complies with Mamie's request and excludes Bumpy from the investigation. However, Chin captures one of his men because he doesn't understand why Banano is pursuing him. That's when he finds out that Banano is pursuing him after discovering that he killed his son. Chin is astonished because nobody else was aware of it. Ernie implies that Bumpy may have persuaded Banano of the same thing, and he must persuade him otherwise. Knowing this, Chin leads Banano to his son's body, which he had already taken away. Chin informs him that Bumpy is making the most money from their conflict and that he was the one who killed his son. Additionally, he informs him that he made Stella talk against him. By identifying the lone witness they were able to locate, Chin was also able to demonstrate to Frank that Bumpy was the one who killed the created man. Stella has the opportunity to meet Teddy's mother. She helps her understand that Teddy will never be safe with her. Stella chooses to end their relationship in order to protect Teddy safe. Later, Stella attempts suicide because she is distraught from the separation. She does, however, live. Chin agrees that he won't pursue Teddy after witnessing her daughter in this state. As she heals, Teddy pays her a visit, and their love blossoms once more. Teddy later tells her that they may move away because his music is loved and that he bought them tickets to LA. And following Teddy's performance at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, they make the decision to depart. Benny, one of Chin's guys, accuses Ernie of failing to deal with Teddy earlier, which is why Chin is currently in such agony. He informs him that even if their employer hasn't asked, they still need to take the necessary action. However, the commission, which is made up of the 5 mob families, gets together to question Bumpy. Banano doesn't believe Bumpy when he attempts to explain that he had nothing to do with his son's death. However, it was sufficient for the families to withdraw their protection because he had killed a made man. This is when Bumpy informs them that he has all the documents and information about their money laundering and tax scams, and that he will provide the information to the authorities if anything were to happen to him, his family, or his men. As a result, Bumpy can now save himself. However, he is aware that if he ever does, he will also be imprisoned because the records clearly show this. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy follows. Bumpy is aware that he was the driving force for numerous reforms and that without him, they might not have the protection and clout he believed he had. Because Bumpy senses that things are going to get difficult, he sends his family away. Malcolm is advised by Elijah Muhammad to refrain from making any political remarks about the president's assassination during his interview. Malcolm, however, can't help himself. He is therefore instructed to leave the country and cut off all contact with its citizens when he returns. The loss of the president also puts Congressman Powell in a difficult situation. However, the mob is able to push him even farther away by utilizing the case of Esther James. Powell was hiding, and the president was no longer there. Additionally, the inquiry against mob is dropped, which reduces Bumpy's power. Bumpy lives and is saved by Elise despite Chin sending an assassin after him. Ernie rushes to warn Teddy and persuade him to leave town as he emerges from his performance at the Apollo Theater. Stella stands next to Benny as he shoots and kills Ernie while he is speaking with Teddy. As the season comes to a close, Chin asks the commission to vote to kill Bumpy, and they all agree, knowing that the probe against them is over. Thank you for viewing. If you enjoyed it, kindly subscribe.